The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints takes no position on the specific geographic locations of Book of Mormon events in the ancient Americas. However, it is our belief, and based on all of the research and evidence that we have examined, that the people described in the Book of Mormon who sailed from the Middle East to America ended up in Central America, where they settled down and then migrated later to Northern America. It was there that the records were kept and stored. It is also our belief that eventually all records of the people were brought to and centralized in northeastern America, where they remained until Joseph Smith was called by God to bring them forth out of the darkness and into the light. This video focuses on evidence found in North America.
Millions of people worldwide believe in the Book of Mormon. Published in 1830 by religious leader Joseph Smith, this book of scripture tells an historical account of a group of ancient American inhabitants who was visited by the resurrected Christ. But did these events actually take place? And if they did, where?
There's got to be physical evidence, especially when the Book of Mormon itself prophesies that there would be.
It depends on where the setting is.
People say all the time, it doesn't matter where it happened, it just matters that it happened. It does matter.
People want to know, what kind of evidence is there really for the Book of Mormon?
It puts an ancient Hebrew people here in North America before Columbus.
There are tens of thousands of mounds, earthwork structures, and fortifications that once existed.
The first explorers who came here destroyed it.
So whether we have an uncontrolled dig or a controlled dig, if we find something of antiquity, we lose.
Does this mean case closed? Or is there any hard evidence to defend the beliefs of millions? When you peel back the pre-Columbian history of the United States, you might just find the Book of Mormon. Hidden in the heartland.
In 1491, the Americas, too, are a crowded and prosperous place, but in a very different way. The Andes cradled a vast empire ruled by powerful god kings. Mesoamerica is densely populated and home to the most impressive civilizations on the continent. The Atlantic coast is filled with smaller villages and fields. And along the great rivers, great cities are built around monumental plazas. It is an ancient world, inhabited by 100 million people. Hunters and gatherers, fishermen and farmers, kings, slaves and soldiers. Down among the trees, where the Missouri, Illinois, and Mississippi rivers merge, lies one of the largest civilizations on the continent. The native Mississippians are mound builders, occupying a vast region from the Great Lakes in the north to Florida in the south. The first explorers thought these great mounds were natural, carved by retreating glaciers. Now we know that they are the centerpieces of cities. Cities like Cahokia. Busy trading posts of earth and wood, with populations of up to thousands of people. No one knows what they called themselves or what language they spoke. But we know why they were successful. These Mississippians are farmers. Their staple crop is fuel for the ever-growing population. It is a plant native to the Americas, unknown to the rest of the world. But corn is not a blessing from nature or a gift of the gods. This crop is the outcome of man's first feat of genetic engineering. Once they learned how to grow it, they could stay in one place. This simple diet translated straight into the energy to build a civilization.
The ditches and earth bank structures, there's literally thousands of them that dot the interior of America. The ditches and the earth banks. I'd love to spend about 2 hours and talk about the Newark Hopewell site in Newark, Ohio, which is a 4 square mile gigantic set of earth complexes that basically square rectangular structures and circular structures and an octagonal structure that is connected with roadways and so forth. And it wasn't until some Hebrew experts were able to take a look at this, who are also LDS, that we realized that the entire plan of salvation, as only the restored gospel of Jesus Christ can explain it, is embedded in this gigantic earthwork complex that's almost 4 square miles in extent. Even today, it is the largest temple complex on the planet. And no other religion could begin to explain this 2,000-year-old set of earthworks there that have everything from the pre-existence to the veil to this earth life to the terrestrial and celestial kingdoms. Even it has a direct route. It even has a vicarious route for people who have died and need to have their work done, with checkpoints all along the way of the things that they need to have done before they can make it to the celestial part. It is absolutely stunning. And it's still, much of it is still there in gigantic earthworks that would have taken years probably to create them. Literally millions upon millions of basket loads of dirt required to make these gigantic earthworks. And yet most members of the church don't know that they even exist. In fact, many of the people that live in Newark, Ohio don't know they exist. And it's right there in their town. It's amazing. Yeah. I was at the April conference in 2003, and we were standing outside the conference center. That was right after the 2002 Olympics, and I noticed there was this huge banner, this great big banner outside of the conference center, and it said very clearly, it's a big white banner with big red letters, and it says, "DNA proves the Book of Mormon is false." And I was looking at that, and at the time I had access. I was working on a natural sciences textbook project with some colleagues, and had access to some of the top research libraries in the country. And I said, you know what? What's the answer to that? And so I started looking into it. I started finding some very interesting things. And essentially, in a nutshell, what happened was when DNA sequencing became possible, as they started to sequence DNA from Native American populations through North, Central, and South America, they found that their DNA could be categorized into one of 4 primary groups called haplogroups. I'll just call them lineages. And so you have they call them haplogroups A, B, C, and D. And they found that the markers that differentiate between these 4 groups, all of those markers could be found in Asian populations. But Lehi and his family, they were Hebrews. They came down through the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then there was an interesting interview, actually, that was done during the 2002 Olympics with President Hinckley. There was this German reporter, and he asked President Hinckley, what's going to be your church's position when DNA shows that there's no evidence for the Book of Mormon? He says, when it comes down to genetics, he says, we don't know the answer to this, not at this point. That was in 2002. I submit that President Hinckley is a prophet of God, because 1 year later, articles started to come out in scientific peer-reviewed genetics journals that talked about a new founding lineage. These were each of these forward lineages. They found a new founding lineage, which was primarily found among the Algonquin-speaking language groups of North American Indians. And they were indicated by 5 specific markers in their DNA that differentiate them from the other 4. And when they went looking for these 5 markers in other populations around the earth, guess where they found them? They were in the Druze population of Israel. They found that they were, later on, additional research found that they were in the Ashkenazi Jews population, which is the largest population of Jews on the planet. It's in the Sephardic Jews, the Libyan Jews, the Moroccan Jews, the Tunisian Jews. All of these diverse Jewish populations around the world have these 5 markers, which are also found in the Algonquin-speaking language groups, which is about 110 Native American tribes in North America. For example, the Sioux, and the Cheyenne, and the Blackfoot, the Cherokee, the Iroquois, the Ojibwe, the Sac and the Fox, Potawatomi, the Penobscot. All of these tribes, and mostly concentrated in the Great Lakes region of the United States and Canada, is where they find these 5 markers and these people. And so they actually they started to dig up bones from the ancient mound builder civilization that occupied the heartland of North America. And when they sequenced the bones directly from those people, they found the same 5 markers, and they carbon date into Book of Mormon timeframes. So unlike the Mayan civilization in Central America, which has no evidence for any Hebrew population, these up here do have solid genetic evidence that they came from that. These tribes today came from their ancestral people are the mound builder civilization of North America. They're not the Mayans from Central America. And so that led me to go, well, good grief. Maybe there's something to this. But what I found is that there is a very highly organized and entrenched group of scholars, primarily have been from BYU, who have over the course of time been looking for evidences for the Book of Mormon down in Mesoamerica or Central America among the Mayan civilization. And they've done extensive research and extensive writing and so forth. What we found is that they have done this primarily because it was believed that Joseph Smith thought that the Book of Mormon happened in Central America. And so really, now this is before there's been some really breakthroughs in the last year, just in the last few months in regard to that. But prior to that, I wanted to find out, well, what did Joseph Smith know about all this? I mean, he obviously saw angels, and he met with some of these actual people from the Book of Mormon timeframes, these prophets and so forth that came to actually visit him. But what did he really know about it? The geography of the Book of Mormon. And then that led to an intensive study about Joseph Smith and what he knew about this. And probably some of the most powerful things as far as that's concerned is that Joseph Smith, there's really 2 or 3 different things that really indicate what Joseph Smith knew as far as this is concerned. One of them is that he was commanded by the Lord when the very first copies of the Book of Mormon, after they were just now coming off of the Grandin Press there in Palmyra, New York. And the Lord commanded Joseph Smith to send missionaries unto the Lamanites. And this is all recorded in the Doctrine and Covenants. So this is canonized scripture. And in section 28 and 30 and 32, the Lord commanded Joseph Smith to send Oliver Cowdery, Peter Whitmer Jr., Parley P. Pratt, and a guy by the name of Ziba Peterson to take those first copies of the Book of Mormon and go unto who? The Lamanites. And in every single one of those sections in the Doctrine and Covenants, it specifically calls them Lamanites. It didn't say to go to the Indians. He said go to the Lamanites. But in section 32 of the Doctrine and Covenants, right after he called Ziba Peterson, the Lord said something very critical, very important. He said, and Ziba Peterson shall go with them, and I myself will go with them and go before them. He says, I will be in their midst, and that nothing shall prevail against them. This is a personal guided tour by the Lord himself to the Lamanites. Now, big question is, as a member of the church, do you believe that the Lord knows where the Lamanites are located? Because if you do, then this is a personal guided tour by the Lord to those people, to the actual remnant of the actual Lamanites who were here. And where did they go? Party P. Pratt wrote this in his journal, and later on it was in his autobiography. They went to go visit 4 tribes. They were the Cattaraugus Indians in New York, the Wyandots of Ohio, and I can't remember the last name, but they were in 3 places: New York, Ohio, and Missouri. And what's interesting, and I think it's more than interesting, I think it's critically important we understand, when modern day geneticists have sequenced the DNA from those tribes that they went to go see, every one of those tribes are the tribes, the exact tribes, that have the 5 markers in their DNA that link them to every Jewish population on the planet. Now, how did Joseph Smith know that? Lucky guess, right? I submit that there's only one way that Joseph Smith would have known that, and that is because Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. And he knew exactly, he was not speculating about whether or not these were Native American, these Native Americans were the Lamanites. The Lord said they were. And he said he was going to take them on a personal, private journey to go to these people and tell them. And tell them, this book is the history of your ancestors. Twice Joseph Smith did that with the Sac and the Fox Indians that had been driven out of their lands and across the Mississippi River into Iowa. And then they came back when the Saints established Nauvoo. They came back. One time they came back, and Joseph Smith said, he actually told them, this is in the history of the church. He said, this book is the history of your ancestors. And who told him? The Great Spirit. That's what he said. Joseph Smith claimed the Great Spirit, i.e. God, the Lord, had told him that this book was the history of the ancestral people of the Sac and the Fox Indians. Well, who are the ancestral people of the Sac and the Fox Indians? They weren't the Mayans. They were the Hopewell Mound Builder civilization of North American Indians. And then there was a second time. People say, well, yeah, maybe Joseph Smith kind of thought that at the beginning, but then he changed his mind. Well, there's no evidence that Joseph Smith ever changed his mind, because 1 month before his assassination, he had the Sac and the Fox Indians came again a second time. This is actually written in his personal journal. And the second time he told them, this book is about your ancestors, and the Great Spirit told me so. I believe Joseph Smith. I believe he was a prophet of God. I believe the Lord knows exactly where the Lamanites are located, and the North American Indians are the remnant Lamanites. But in contrast to that, there have been many, many artifacts with written characters and so forth on it. But unfortunately, because of the archaeological community in the United States, both in the 1800s as well as today, the general consensus is that the Native Americans here in North America were just a group of ignorant savages. That term, by the way, came from a book which was written by a guy who was one of 3 guys who were very much instrumental in trying to actually hide the ancient history of this mound builder civilization. In fact, one of those guys was John Wesley Powell. Lake Powell in Utah was named after him. One was Ephraim George Squires, and the other one is Lewis Henry Morgan. And Lewis Henry Morgan actually was the author of a book called Ancient Societies, in which he says that all human civilizations go through three stages of development. They start off as ignorant savages, they move up to barbarism, and then up to civilization. And it was in that book that he labels the Native Americans as ignorant savages. And that book became the handbook of instructions for dealing with the Indians by the United States government. And according to American Manifest Destiny doctrine, the Indians, because they were this ignorant people, they could be then denied their rights to vote, their rights denied to own land, and they were then looked upon as being a subhuman species because Lewis Henry Morgan was also a very big advocate of another philosopher at the time by the name of Charles Darwin, who basically said that all humans evolved from apes and so forth, and so it was just thought that the Indians were just not as evolved as the Europeans were, and that's why they could take their lands and their rights from them, even though they're surely human beings, same as the Europeans. So that became played into this as well. It's interesting to note, though, that two of those three guys, they were so instrumental, and they became some of the most highly influential men in the United States, in science, in the United States government, in dealing with the Indians and so forth. I mean, John Wesley Powell was one of the heads of the Smithsonian Institution. Later on, he was the head of the Department of Indian Affairs. He was a folk hero after he came out here to the Colorado River and so forth, and he had the ear of every president of the United States until his death. They were using their influence to try to downplay the importance of this ancient civilization that they found in the heartland of America. And why would they do that? One of those things was manifest destiny. But there was another interesting aspect. Two of those three guys, just happened to be born to fathers who were Methodist ministers in Palmyra, New York, in 1830. Why is that significant? What's the chances that a Methodist minister in Palmyra, New York in 1830 had not heard about this upstart young prophet by the name of Joseph Smith and his gold Bible, which talked about this highly advanced civilization that had a written language and so forth, and had roads and cities and on all these increments of culture and sophistication. If they could somehow claim that all the Native American peoples had never attained that level of sophistication or that level of culture, then it would actually undermine the claims of Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And they set out to do that. And that we actually have non-Mormon experts who said that there was a deliberate attempt, a wanton destruction of this ancient history and recording it. And that's a real interesting aspect of this, because it's exactly what you would think Satan would probably want to have happen, is to have the history of the Book of Mormon destroyed. But they didn't destroy it all, because in the last couple of years, in fact, there's a show by the name of America Unearthed. This America Unearthed show is on the History 2 channel. The star of the show is Scott Wolter, and Scott Wolter is a forensic geologist. He is the owner of American Petrographic Services out of St. Paul, Minnesota. He's also a openly atheist individual as far as his religious beliefs. But he does the materials analysis for the United States government and for the military and so forth. And there has now been found 7 different either artifacts or locations that have Hebrew writing. They've been very controversial. But he has actually gone to at least 2 of them. For example, one of them is the Bat Creek Stone, which was actually uncovered in an official archaeological dig by the Smithsonian back in 1889. It has characters on it. The characters were originally thought to be Paleo-Cherokee and actually published as such in one of the publications of the Smithsonian Institution, who was in charge of the Mound Survey Project, which actually why they were doing the digging on these mounds. But then 75 years later, some Hebrew experts came upon that publication and realized that the Smithsonian had published it upside down. If you rotate the illustration 180 degrees, it's perfectly legible Hebrew and translates to "for the Judeans," which is a clear reference to Judah, which is the old world. And this is found under the head of a skeleton in a mound on just off of the Tennessee River. And the mound dates to 100 AD. And he actually went in with scanning electron microscopy, and then also with the latest technology, which is a 3D digital microscope, and with other experts, and established the fact that there's no way that this stone could have been forged or faked back in the 1800s, because of the fact that where you scratch with a a stylus. When you scratch that into the stone, it actually rips away part of the outer crust of the stone, and that is very jagged at first. But over the course of centuries, that will start to erode out and actually become nice, very smooth where that had been. This was so smooth, he says, there's no way that this could have been done in the 1800s, because it would still be jagged from that. So he came to the scientific conclusion that this stone is not a modern hoax. It is a genuine artifact. And how it arrived here in America with Hebrew writing on it, they don't have a clue, but the Book of Mormon has the answer. And it's not the only one. There's one other one that's a really important one. He also did the same kind of analysis on this stone. It's called the Decalogue stone. It was found in Newark, Ohio in 1860 by a guy by the name of David Wyrick. He was a town surveyor and a very well-respected man of the community. They had 9 individuals that came out. They dug down this mound. They found this stone. When they tossed it out, it went clunk, and so they went and looked at it, and they could shake it, and there was something inside of it. They cleaned it off. They found it had a rim around it, so they took chisels and chiseled it out, popped it open. Inside there was this black stone covered with writing. They took it to some rabbis, and the rabbis looked at it and said, it's Hebrew. And they were able to actually, they said it's a form of Hebrew we've never seen before because it's so early. But the Hebrew that's on it is definitely Hebrew, and they were able to translate it. And guess what it translates to? The one thing that God requires for the covenant nation to receive all the covenant blessings is to live the 10 Commandments. That's what's inscribed on a stone that came out of a mound that carbon dates into Book of Mormon timeframes. It was so important that the stone, not only did they carve it in stone, but then they carved out 2 other stones, and they sandwiched it so that it would be protected by other stones, so that their children's children's children, generation after generation, would have the one thing that they have to be able to receive every blessing of the sacred covenant with God that's on this nation.
This is the Decalogue stone with the 10 Commandments written on it on all sides of it. And this is a stone box that the Decalogue was found in.
Okay.
So when it was found, it was enclosed in this box, and you couldn't even see the stone inside. The box is carved out inside exactly to fit the Decalogue stone.
Who's that guy?
Well, this figure here on the front that's wearing a robe and a turban and holding either tablets or a breastplate, and over his head in these Hebrew letters it says Moshe or Moses.
Oh.
So must be Moses.
Okay, that's Moses, all right.
Who delivered the 10 Commandments.
10 Commandments, okay, well. It seems to pass the scrutiny of the skeptics as far as the Hebrew text and the language, so now I'd like to try to add some evidence to this whole discussion. Polished after it was carved. It's scratched like I would expect. Well, it fits snug.
So the box in itself took an awful lot of work. I mean, if it was really a forgery, you wouldn't go to all that much trouble to make a box for it. So I think that speaks to its authenticity, that someone really this was very important to someone.
This is a lot of work, and it's polished. It's got the detailing of the grooves. It wasn't made, as far as I can tell, from modern machinery. Geologically, I don't see any problems here that would make these things obvious hoaxes. So the skeptics have rejected this.
Well, that's been a factor, but Hebrew is an odd thing to find here.
The fact that it's odd doesn't mean that it's not genuine. What it boils down to is really the problem with these artifacts is that the academics don't like them because they don't fit the paradigm. And unfortunately for them, you can't dismiss things simply because you don't like them.
Right.
And so the evidence to me seems clear. There's no reason not to accept these as genuine, legitimate artifacts.
Scott Walter, an atheist and forensic geologist, from the History Channel, America Unearthed, said in conclusion, what it boils down to is that the problem with these artifacts is that the academics don't like them because they don't fit the paradigm. Unfortunately, for them you can't dismiss things simply because you don't like them. When people dismiss the evidence simply because they don't like it, this behavior is known as confirmation bias, which brings us to our next video.
When I was younger, I thought my mind had direct access to reality. However, as I matured, I started noticing some inconsistencies with this theory. I wondered, could it be that rational, sane people, like you and I, were filtering reality? Watch the following clip.
Ban, 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 ban.
If you're like most of us, your brain probably glitched out and you heard the word ban. Take a look.
Ban, 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 ban.
I find it interesting that the brain heard what it expected to hear, rather than what was actually said. Even more troubling is that none of us were trying to deceive ourselves. It was an unintentional, unconscious process. At the time, I didn't know that this phenomenon had been known and understood for thousands of years by philosophers. Scientists have been researching and documenting its effects for decades. It is called the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a tendency of people to favor information that confirms their beliefs or hypotheses. People display this bias when they gather or remember information selectively, or when they interpret it in a biased way. The effect is stronger for emotionally charged issues and for deeply entrenched beliefs. It is called the confirmation bias because research shows that most people prefer confirming their beliefs rather than proving them wrong. This is a form of selective thinking, which leads to statistical errors. For example, if Pat believes that during a full moon there is an increase in admissions to the emergency room where he works, he will tend to pay attention to the high admissions during a full moon, but pay less attention to the high admissions during other nights of the month. A tendency to do this over time unjustifiably strengthens his belief in the relationship between the full moon and the accidents. A much more serious case involving confirmation bias occurred during the Mayfield fingerprint error. On March 11, 2004, a bomb exploded on a train in Madrid, killing 191 people and injuring thousands of others. A latent fingerprint was recovered from the crime scene and searched in the FBI's database of over 500 million known fingerprints. One of the 20 possible matches was Brandon Mayfield, an Oregon attorney who had converted to Islam and defended Muslim suspects. A first FBI expert declared that Mayfield's fingerprints matched the partial. A second and then third FBI expert verified the match. The FBI called it an absolutely incontrovertible match, and Mayfield was subsequently taken into police custody. Next, an independent defense fingerprint expert also verified the FBI's match. However, the match proved to be an error when Spanish police subsequently identified the real bomber. How did all four experts make the same mistake? Well, when the first investigator decided it was a match, he had unknowingly influenced the other investigators' minds. Once influenced, they had unconsciously decided that Mayfield was guilty. So when they examined the prints, they could only see similarities rather than any differences. They were seeking for facts to fit their theory, rather than seeking a theory that fit all the facts. As I learned more about the confirmation bias, I realized that it was only the tip of the iceberg. It was just one of many cognitive biases that prevented people from finding the truth. It led to irrational thinking in all areas of life, costing governments, corporations, and individuals billions of dollars in mistakes each year. I learned that being aware of the confirmation bias helped reduce its effects, but not entirely. I also found that experts in many fields had to deal with the confirmation bias on a daily basis. Which center circle is bigger? It turns out they're both the same size. Just as there are well-known brain glitches that result in optical illusions, there are other well-known glitches that affect our mental processing. In the previous video, we discussed the confirmation bias. In essence, the brain tends to unconsciously gather evidence to support its existing views, while at the same time edit out the evidence that oppose its beliefs. The end result is that the brain will change its mind less often than expected when new information is made available. I began to notice a strong pattern as I studied religious history. Even after life supplies us with ample counter-evidence, we humans often choose to maintain our religious beliefs. I finally got it. Being wrong was an important step towards truth, and my integrity demanded that I put down my defenses and investigate both sides sincerely.
Is made up of 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet, 606 feet, 606. It's made up of stades, exactly the same. Now, if that's not interesting enough, look at the angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you take the angle of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the slope is 51.8 degrees. Let's go back to the earthworks. If you measure the line that goes straight through the center of the structure, right here, and then you go true north, it's 51.8 degrees. That angle is exactly the same angle as the pyramids of Giza. It is the same math, the same calculations as ancient Egyptians. Let me show you one more connection. In 1860, David Wyrick, he's a guy who surveyed the Newark earthworks. He was digging into a mound near those earthworks, and he found a wooden coffin made of oak. They opened up the coffin and found a skeleton of a man holding a little box that was about 8.10 inches in size. The box had been cemented shut here. This, by the way, is sitting in Ohio. Well, he opened up the box and he found a little man inside, a little black stone. They took it to scholars, and they looked at it. The man seems to be carrying something, and there's writing here. At first, they couldn't recognize. The writing is, they thought in 1860, some sort of Hebrew. Well, finally, about 20 years later, they found some rabbis living in the area, and the rabbis looked at that, and they could read it. They said it was an old kind of block Hebrew, and it was a rendition of the Ten Commandments. Now, this is another piece. Block Hebrew. They said they'd never seen anything like it. Mainstream archaeologists at the time called this a hoax. But then in 1900, or just about after 1900, in Israel, they found the same block-style Hebrew writing. Mainstream archaeologists still dismiss the findings. They found it in Israel, and they found it in Ohio. But there was another stone that they found that they couldn't argue. This is the Bat Creek stone. It was found during the course of an official Smithsonian evacuation. The Smithsonian didn't understand the meaning of the writing on the stone. They thought it was Cherokee, since it came from Cherokee country. They didn't realize that it's actually Hebrew. They had published this originally upside down. They threw it in a box at the bottom of the Smithsonian, put it in the basement. Many years later, a scholar took it out of the box, looked at it, and went, oh my gosh, it's upside down. It's Phoenician, ancient Hebrew. So what's going on here? What is that about? Where is that history? I'll show you in a few minutes, and we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to show you some more things that the Smithsonian, science, government, commerce colluded to erase. By the way, I want to thank the directors of the documentary Lost Civilizations of North America for bringing these stories to my attention. I was blown away. To find more, visit the website lostcivilizationdvd.com. Here's the thing we should be asking ourselves. I don't know the story of these. Do you know that? Did you know that? Do you live in Ohio and did you know that? Why not? Were the American Indians wronged? Yes. Yes, and that's what we focus on in America, is we were bad to the American. Forget about it, it's in the past. The question should be the ones that the founders asked. Who are they? What knowledge do they have? Can you imagine the difference we would have now if we would put our differences aside and put our past in the past and concentrate on today and say, let's learn from each other. What do you have? What is that? What is that? And I'm also going to show you some documents that show how that history has been erased. Next. This is the Smithsonian annual report 1882, 1883. This is John Wesley Howell. This is an original copy. John Wesley Howell in 1789. Again, this is Powell. This is the director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian Institute. He said this: artifacts found prior to Christopher Columbus's arrival would be considered illegitimate by the Smithsonian. Only the savage Indian culture would be observed, and this created the artificial barrier to science. Only the savage. Science was colluding with government because of commerce, and religion was involved. Now, why do I tell you all this stuff? Not because I'm an Indian expert or anything else. You got to do your own homework. I just found out about this stuff. I'm amazed by it. I don't know what the answer is on this. The reason why I bring it up is the stock is not bad. The soup went bad.
Science colluded with the government to create what began as a precursor to establish a belief system known as manifest destiny, which was used to cover up archaeological evidence because of commerce and religious issues. For example, government called Indians savages. Therefore, science and government used this to justify controlling the Indians and taking away their lands, and agreed that savages could never build such things as big cities and infrastructures. Therefore, any archaeological evidence supporting the Book of Mormon or any advanced civilization could be easily discredited and be falsely identified as being fake. Two of these men were Lewis Henry Morgan and John Wesley Powell. They were very influential in the scientific community and with the government, and were instrumental in bringing the manifest destiny philosophy to the mainstream. Also, these two men were sons of Methodist ministers from Palmyra, New York, where Joseph Smith was from. So there was a very strong bias against Joseph Smith and people called the Mormons, which has carried over even until today. With their background being from the same place as Joseph Smith, they would have definitely been influenced by personal bias to protect their own beliefs. In this regard, collusion with the government to destroy any truth and evidence to the contrary to their own belief would have been an easy thing for them to do, especially any evidence that would support the Book of Mormon as being a true historical account of an ancient civilization that lived long ago. John Wesley Powell created the blueprint for how to handle Indians based on them being deemed as savages. By 1894, most of, if not all, mound investigations and archaeological digs had ceased, with the Indians now being considered savages. Thus, it was easier to convince people that Native Americans needed to be placed on reservations. This leads us into our next video, which shows that science is still colluding with government to deceive, discredit, and control people.
So, first of all, scientists can bullshit people, engineers can't. You know, I'm a biological engineer, I'm an electrical engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm an engineer of scientific visualization, okay? So what is engineering? Engineering means you have to take the principles of what you think is science, which is always, you're always probing it, it's always a law or a theory, and you have to apply it. So you could understand Bernoulli's principle, which means when air comes, you get lift under a foil, airfoil, but until you build an airplane, it's not real. It's just like theory. So the engineer does something far more interesting than the scientist. The engineer has to, where the rubber meets the road. So I trust engineers more than I do scientists. You know, people actually build something, the plumber, the electrician, people actually have to solve problems. Because when you have to solve something, you have to actually practice the principles of science. And if those principles can't work, that means the science is bullshit. Okay? So engineers, you can't build a piece of software and say, well, you can't talk your way through it. What do scientists do? They gather data and they fit a bunch of lines to a curve. It's more statistics. So scientists can bullshit, engineers can't. Because you can talk your way out of it. You can talk and the airplane falls out of the sky. It doesn't matter what you thought you did, or you can talk all sorts of things. You build a piece of software, no one buys it. It means something's wrong. Your stuff is not the rubber's not meeting the road, or the rubber, is not touching the road, or whatever that analogy is. The point is that engineers have to make something. This is why working people already know a lot of this stuff is okay? They may not go to MIT and blah, 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 but they know, what are you talking about? Truth, freedom, and health. So why does this occur? It really goes back to something. Why did we have kings? Why did we have, warlords who oppressed billions, hundreds of millions of people kept in slavery? Why did that occur? Why did we as people allow a king who said he had a direct connection to God, there was few of them, to control millions of other people? How did that happen? How did that happen? How did we let a guy bamboozle all of us to say, I have a direct connection to God. I get to put a crown on my head. I get to wear these robes and tell you, my subjects, what to do. How did that ever happen? How did that happen? And it happened because of a massive, massive manipulation, not by the king, but by someone above him. In the Indian caste system, you had what was called the priesthood, right? The Brahmanical folks on the top, the scribes who said they were the magicians, they had access to the gods. And they're the ones who advised the king, who controlled the army, who controlled the business folks, and then the rest of us were slaves at the bottom. So it has been the people who manipulate our psychology, who manipulate our brainwash us on behalf of control of massive amounts of wealth and power. But what's interesting about the academic priesthood is they're worse than, in some ways they're more dangerous than the Wall Street guys. They don't care about money. They do care about money. Like some academic at Harvard, he gets money, he's pretty well taken care of. But he's not about being a billionaire. You know what he wants? He wants control. Control is the opposite of love. It's not hate. They want to control. It's a sickness. It's a sociopathic sickness. It's actually a sickness, I believe. So this occurs because there are people who want to have incredible amount of control, power, and profit. That's where you put a guy like Bill Gates. Because he is convinced he knows better than you or I. It's a megalomania. It's a sickness. It's actually, I think, a mental sickness. And because no one challenges these bullies, no one is willing to take them down because they do incantations. Like you just said when you started this conversation, you're not a scientist. Well, this goes against common sense. I mean, not one kid, when you look at the cases, the number of kids that have died below the age of 20 is near zero. Yet we're scaring children. This is the actual facts. If you look at some place like Florida, right, 1,900 cases under the age of 25 of 20 million people. Not one kid has died. Not one death. Of the people under the over the age of 75, 2,500 cases and 360 deaths. You're looking still at minuscule numbers, but you're able to take data and you're able to pummel people with fake science, in this case big pharma, and a massive ad campaign of input. So what I want people to do is step back, and what you'll see in this current situation, it's incredible amount of power. And that power is a transport of information, massive amounts of propaganda, over and over and over again, with incredible amounts of ignorance. That's what's being done.
This next video is a big spoof showing how information is manipulated and dispersed according to the dictates of those who are in power and those who are behind the scenes running the show. America Unearthed is a History Channel show that covers the finding of ancient people who lived in America long before Columbus. Ironically, as close to the Book of Mormon these findings have become, the History Channel has refused to talk to any representatives from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The following 7-minute video was our response.
Coming up next on the Discovering History Channel.
I'm James Talker. I'm a forensic scientist with a minor in social work, and I love a good mystery. Do you? There were people here long before, and it's my job to find out who they were, what they were doing, why they were here. Stuff. There are inscriptions on stones that date back to before Christ, written in Hebrew. There's temples, religious artifacts. Where did they all come from? Some say it could have been the lost tribes of Israel. Some say it might have been Jews who escaped Jerusalem around 600 BC from persecution. My objective is to find the truth about some of the secrets that America has earthed, so I will then unearth them. I'm James Talker with America Revealed. The Bat Creek Stone. Wow. The Bat Creek Stone, as I live and breathe. Look at that. That's... Now, I'm no Hebrew master, but it looks like it says something that's almost like an Anglo-Greek limcrafters. Limcrafters.
Men's crafters. That's my glasses case. Predates Columbus. This is 100 BC. Very rarely seen here in the US.
Yeah. Yeah, that sucker's old right there.
Indeed.
That's what that is. And what does it say? Have you translated it yet?
Well, what we have here are the words for the Judeans.
Uh-huh. But have you translated it for us? The question then becomes, who brought this relic to America? Who came upon our loamy shores bringing rocks with them with Hebrew writing on them?
Yes. There is one possible explanation which comes from the Mormons. They claim that the book of Scripture, actually the Book of Mormon, was written by people who lived here long ago who were practicing Jews.
Well,
and they escaped Jerusalem to escape persecution there around 600 BC.
Yeah, that's certainly
So that could definitely be one of the solutions. They would have had writing, maybe a reformed...
What you're saying makes perfect sense to me. Hang on. Yeah, I don't buy it.
No, but actually, this is a probable
I doubt it.
Because
the fact is we've been told by people that are much smarter than you and I, let's face it. The two of us together are just a pair of doctors. These guys are network executives. Decalogue Stone. I'm here at the Ohio Mounds Museum to see the Decalogue Stone, which was found not far from here. I'm here with Master Curator Melanie, whose last name will remain... What's your last name? Melanie, what can you tell me about the Decalogue Stone?
The Decalogue Stone was found in 1860 in a burial mound inside a stone box. There is a man depicted in the middle who is seemingly wearing a robe.
It appears to be some sort of religious ritual.
The reason we think that this might be religious is that this could be Moses.
Wow. Did you all get that? Moses, that's amazing. Now that's a mystery we didn't expect to unearth or discover. Why do you think it's Moses?
Well, the reason we think it's Moses is that there is this black Hebrew writing on the outside.
I've seen this somewhere before.
We have had this translated, and it actually turns out to be the Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments? You mean the ones that came from Mount Tabor and
Sinai?
The burning of the leaves.
Right.
I'm amazed right now because right here in the heartland of the United States, right here on this, the American continent, I'm flummoxed. No matter how many questions I ask of the right people and some of the wrong ones, I just can't seem to find the answers.
Well, you know, I've been doing some research. I've been reading about these people, and they're the earliest people to practice Ten Commandments. You know, the Mormons, basically. You've heard of them? Well, the Mormons believe that the Ten Commandments came...
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of academic chit-chat, very good. Okay. We're not supposed to talk about the Mormons on this. But we're here to unearth the truth. Mounds. Carl, thanks again for agreeing to meet me here. I know this is a little out of your way.
This is where I work.
We are here because of your interest in mounds. Obviously, the mounds that are here in America, many Americans don't even know exist. Now, some of these mounds, you can tell me that there are mysteries hidden beneath some of these things that a lot of Americans would never have known had they not been unearthed.
Well, actually, I have a map here This is an overview.
Wow.
This is from the 1823 Army Corps of Engineers.
I didn't even know we had Army in 1823.
And this is a photocopy here from the original map. If we
See, and I had no idea they had photocopiers in the 1800s. Whammo!
If you look at this here, what does that look like to you?
Now, I'm no geneticist, but I dated one once. Clearly biological in nature. Looks like some sort of cartilage, some sort of ribbing. May have been an early whale, or possibly a very large elk.
I mean, to me here, you got, this is like 9 candles.
Well, there's that too. There's that too. I wasn't looking at that.
It looks like a menorah.
Like Liberace once used.
Or the Jews. Attached to the bottom here, that clearly looks like a oil lamp. Dates back just prior to the time of Christ.
Oh, and that would be BC. So who would have brought these things here? Who could have possibly left this stuff here? I mean, what people were there?
Hey, maybe we could ask these guys over here.
Oh, no. Yeah. Nope. Can't. No, we can't talk to them.
Well then, James, there's clearly no other explanation other than aliens.
Time-traveling aliens. Otherwise, how could they have known about Liberace, right? I'm James Talker with America Revealed.
Now, let's hear from a real scientist who is also an engineer.
This thing is polished after it was carved. It's scratched like I would expect. This is a lot of work, and it's polished. It's got the detailing of the grooves. It wasn't made, as far as I can tell, from modern machinery. Geologically, I don't see any problems here that would make these things obvious hoaxes. So the skeptics have rejected this.
Well, that's been a factor, but Hebrew is an odd thing to find here.
The fact that it's odd doesn't mean that it's not genuine. What it boils down to is really the problem with these artifacts is that the academics don't like them because they don't fit the paradigm. And unfortunately for them, you can't dismiss things simply because you don't like them.
Right.
And so the evidence to me seems clear. There's no reason not to accept these as genuine, legitimate artifacts.
So now we are left with two choices. So who are you going to believe? The knucklehead scientists who are behind the scenes colluding with government to destroy truth, evidence, and knowledge, in order that they may deceive and control the masses by using fake news and false narratives? Or are going to believe in a real scientist like Scott Walter, who, as you saw in the video, uses real science and engineering tools in pursuit of discovering the truth? Not only that, as an atheist, his analysis of the artifacts would not be compromised by personal bias on whether he liked it or not, or whether it fit his own paradigm. He had no paradigm except to pursue truth and genuine evidence. Unlike John Wesley Powell and Lewis Henry Morgan, whose agenda was to create their own paradigm to fit their own personal biases, in order to justify stealing the land away from the Indians and change the narrative of their history as found in archaeology and in the Book of Mormon. Scott Walker is who we choose to believe. As you go on to the next videos, many more archaeological evidence that the government and scientists have tried to keep hidden and covered up will be revealed.
Part 7. Native Americans with Hebrew and other Middle Eastern ancestry. Alright, this section probably should have been Part 1 because it's loaded with solid evidence. But I'm kind of glad that it's Part 7 because even though I knew enough in 2015 to make a video about it, I've learned so much more since then, which is why this section is so long. And it's still a condensed version. So stick with me to the end. So not only is this section going to go over some controversial ancient writings found on artifacts, rocks, and caves in North America, but it's also going to go over actual Hebrew and Middle Eastern languages and customs that are still preserved in some Native American tribes even to this day. So for people who insist that there's no evidence of Middle Eastern ancestry in any Native Americans, they just haven't done their research. Because again, this video is loaded with examples, which are only the tip of the iceberg of what's available out there to learn. Now there are people out there, especially in US academia, who love to dismiss the tens of thousands of artifacts showing ancient Middle Eastern languages and customs here in North America as fakes. But then how do they explain some of the Middle Eastern languages and customs, particularly Hebrew, that are still preserved among some Native American cultures? Is it just coincidence? Of course not. And I'm going to show you a few examples. Now, I'm not saying that all Native Americans have Hebrew or other Middle Eastern ancestry, but there definitely are some. Now, if you're a Native American watching this video, it may or may not apply to you, depending on what tribes are in your ancestry. If it does apply to you, I'd love to hear what you have to say. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with the name of God. Here are two columns. One column shows the name of God in Hebrew and various pronunciations of it. The other column shows various pronunciations of the name of God or Creator, as he is more often called, in various Native American cultures. Look at his name. Coincidence? No. Next, I want to show you a list of Algonquin words and phrases from a book printed in 1825 called View of the Hebrews by Ethan Smith. Now, like many books in this time period of the United States, it calls the Native Americans savages, which I don't agree with. Just because the Native American tribes had different cultures than the European settlers doesn't mean they were savages. But anyway, be prepared to see that term in old books like this. So here's a list of words and phrases from View of the Hebrews shown in 3 columns. The first column is in English. The second column is from Algonquin tribes originally from the eastern United States before the government took their lands and forced them onto reservations. The third column is Hebrew or Chaldaic, which are both Semitic languages. Obviously, columns 2 and 3 are spelled out with English letters so that the reader can try to pronounce them as they actually sound. Look how similar these words and phrases are that have been preserved in the Algonquin languages. Some are exact, some are near exact, others are very similar. And look at the type of words and phrases. A lot of them are biblical. This is the real deal. Linguistics like this are not coincidences or fakes. View of the Hebrews is a very informative book, and I suggest you read it. It has many more examples of language, customs, and beliefs preserved among Native Americans that tie into Middle Eastern ancestry. Another excellent book is The 10 Tribes of Israel by Timothy R. Jenkins, printed in 1883. There are many other old books like these. I'm going to give an example of an account from the 10 Tribes of Israel. It's on page 16, and I'll just read it for you here. It says, "The following is from Alexander's Messenger, published many years ago in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." And again, this book was published in 1883, so many years ago from 1883. Anyway, it goes on to say, "A government officer stationed at Lake Superior at an early day, before any white settlers had invaded that part of the country, after becoming acquainted with a number of Indian tribes, found one tribe in possession of a copper tube, tightly soldered. And when asked what it contained, they said they were not able to tell, but they had received it from their ancestors a long time ago. The officer finally prevailed upon them to let him open the article, and when he did so, he found it filled with parchment, with inscriptions that he could not read. But by sending the parchment to Washington City, where it was examined by competent Hebrew scholars, it was declared to be part of the 5 books of Moses." So that's the first 5 books of the Bible. Here we have another link in the chain proving that Hebrews were here many years before the white man came to this continent, and that the present North American Indians are their descendants. And again, like I said earlier in this video, I'm not saying that every single Native American tribe has Hebrew ancestry in it, but there definitely are some tribes with Hebrew ancestry in them. Anyway, this book, The 10 Tribes of Israel, and also View of the Hebrews, are filled with awesome stories like this. And like I said, there's many other old books like these out there. You just got to go looking for them and read through them. Now I want to move on to the Micmac Native Americans from the Northeast U.S. and Southeast Canada. So the prophet Joseph Smith said that the original metal plates that the Book of Mormon was engraved on had a reformed Egyptian language. Here are some of the characters from the metal plates copied onto paper in the 1820s. Now, look how similar some of these characters are to characters in the written language of the Micmac tribe, whose written language is a form of Egyptian called Hieratic Egyptian. They had this language before the European settlers even arrived. So even if you don't believe Joseph Smith about the truth of the Book of Mormon, how do the Micmacs have Hieratic Egyptian as their language? Is it fake? Is it just coincidence? No. It's been handed down from their ancient ancestors. That's how they had it before the European settlers arrived. Now I want to move on to Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce tribe, who were forced westward off their land by the U.S. Army. Chief Joseph's story can easily be found on the internet and in various books. In 1877, Chief Joseph, which is his English name, was captured by the Army. When they searched his medicine bag, they took out a small tablet from him. He, the chief, said that the tablet had been passed down in his family for many generations, and that they had inherited it from their white ancestors, and that white men had come among his ancestors long ago. The tablet was confirmed by Professor Robert Biggs to be an ancient writing called cuneiform. Robert Biggs was a professor of Assyriology at the Oriental University of Chicago. The tablet was simply a sales receipt for a lamb bought around 2040 BC in the Assyrian-Babylonian area of the Middle East. I'll let you read the translation here because I'll butcher the names. Babylon is also the area where the Tower of Babel was built, and the Book of Mormon tells us that the Jaredites came to ancient America sometime after the Tower of Babel. And for anyone who assumes that Chief Joseph was lying about the tablet, take a look at his medicine bag. On his medicine bag is a symbol known as the Star of Asher, which is an ancient symbol for an Assyrian-Babylonian god. As of 1971, in honor of that ancient symbol, the Assyrian flag has the Star of Asher on it today. The 4-point star has 3 streams of light going out from between each point. The main difference in Chief Joseph's star is that each stream of light starts out as one stream and then separates into 3 points at the end. This is not fake. This is not coincidence. This is real. Now I want to talk about the Cherokee tribe. Here is their account of the creation of the world, which you'll find is almost exactly the same as described in the book of Genesis in the Bible. This is in their words. You can just pause the video to read over it. The Cherokee also have a special ceremony in the fall called the Green Corn Ceremony. Take some time to pause the video and look at the similarities of the Green Corn Ceremony in comparison to the special fall ceremonies of Israel. The Muskogee or Creek tribe also have a special fall ceremony called the Green Corn Dance. Now take a look at the similarities between this ceremony and the fall ceremonies of Israel. These 2 examples of ceremonial similarities are only from 2 Native American tribes, but there are many more tribes that you can research who also have similar customs and beliefs to the Hebrews. As I've said so many times throughout this video, these are not coincidences. They've been passed down through many generations from their ancient ancestors. Next, I want to talk about the Cheyenne tribe, but I'm going to save that for last because I learned some things from one of their medicine men, and it's going to take up a big chunk of this section. I thought about making it a separate video, but it's just so interesting that I want to share it here. So right now, let's go over some artifacts. Each of these artifacts deserves their own video, which I'd like to do in the future, but this video is already long enough as it is, so I'll be brief about the artifacts. So I've shared some examples of Middle Eastern languages and customs that have been handed down through the generations in some Native American tribes. It's there. It's in their tribes. It can't be denied. It's not fake. It's not coincidence. It's fact. Yet, over the entire history of the United States, whenever artifacts are found that are tied to Middle Eastern cultures, U.S. academia always finds a way to make up a story about how they're fake, and anybody who was involved in finding them is just a fraud. Why? Well, that's a whole other video, and again, I'm trying to keep this as short and simple as I can, but it has to do a lot with ideas called manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery, and a guy you may have heard of by the name of John Wesley Powell. Now, with the tens of thousands of artifacts found in the U.S. over the last few hundred years, of course there's going to be some fakes, but all of them? Not a chance. Especially when there are Native American tribes from the eastern U.S. and Canada who have Middle Eastern languages and customs preserved in their cultures to this day. For every story I've heard from U.S. academia to discredit certain artifacts and the people who found them, there's always been a strong counter-argument in defense of the artifacts, which even some professors at Brigham Young University in Utah don't bother to investigate. But just remember, BYU is not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And just because BYU professors teach something, that doesn't always mean it's true. So first, on many artifacts from the eastern U.S. and Canada, you'll see this symbol. This is a word in the cuneiform language, which originated in the Middle East shortly after the time of the Tower of Babel. Yet, it is a sacred symbol in many Algonquin tribes right here in North America that has been passed on through the generations from their ancient ancestors. Why is it sacred to these tribes? Because it is the name of the Creator, which is read from right to left, and the name is Yod-Heh-Vah. Now, like I said, this symbol has been found all over the eastern half of North America and even out west. But I want to focus right now on what are known as the Michigan relics, many of which have this cuneiform name of God carved on them, as well as Egyptian, Assyrian, Phoenician, and Greek characters, and artwork depicting biblical stories. Yet, U.S. academia says that the Michigan relics are all fakes created by some guys named James Scotford, Daniel Soper, and James Savage, starting in 1890 and into the early 1900s. But there are some major problems with these claims. The biggest problem is that even though the Michigan relics were a popular topic from 1890 to the early 1900s, the artifacts were being found as early as the 1840s. Why is this a big problem? Because Daniel Soper wasn't born until 1843. James Savage wasn't born until 1844. And James Scotford wasn't even born until 1852. You see, after Michigan became a state in 1838, people started moving there. And as they began clearing trees and plowing their fields and also digging through the mounds, they would find these artifacts, sometimes even mangled in the roots of very old trees. Signed documents by more than 50 farmers across 27 counties in Michigan show that they found these artifacts on their lands. And by the 1850s and 60s, there were even museums that had some of the artifacts on display. Another big problem is that the Scotford, Soper, and Savage collection is estimated to about 3,000 pieces. Yet, all the Michigan relics total has a low estimate of 10,000 pieces and a high estimate of 30,000 pieces. And most of them were made from copper and black slate from the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is on the separate part of Michigan on the other side of Lake Michigan and above Wisconsin. And ancient copper mines are there, which are estimated to date back as early as the 2000s BC. And in operation clear up until the 500s AD. And the Adena and Hopewell mound builders were experts in copper and other metal work. And like I said, it wasn't until 1890 that the Michigan relics became well known due to the Scotford, Soper, and Savage collection. Now let's say, for the benefit of the doubt, that these guys were making fakes. Let's say Since they were living in Michigan, they knew about the artifacts that had been found since the 1840s, and they decided to make some fakes and try to get rich and famous. Their 3,000-piece collection is still 7,000 pieces short of the low estimate of Michigan relics. But because U.S. academia says the Scotford, Soper, Savage collection are fakes, they also dismiss the other 7,000 to 27,000 Michigan artifacts and the fact that they were being found as early as the 1840s, before Scotford was even born, and before or around the same time that Soper and Savage were born. And sadly, BYU has this opinion as well. And yes, in the early 1900s, James E. Talmage did spend time with Soper and Savage investigating their collection and did declare them to be fake. But like I said earlier, it is very possible that the Scotford, Soper, and Savage collection was fake, and therefore very possible that Talmage was right. But just because he was an apostle, that does not exclude him from having to do his homework. And if he had done more research beyond the Scotford, Soper, Savage collection, he would have found that the Michigan relics were being found way earlier than 1890. He would have found that the Michigan relics were being found clear back in the 1840s, before Scotford, Soper, and Savage were born. And he would have found that there were thousands and thousands more Michigan relics than what was in the Scotford, Soper, Savage collection. So just for clarification, I'm not disagreeing with James E. Talmage. Regarding the Scotford, Soper, Savage collection, which he investigated and declared to be fake, he could have been right, because again, Scotford, Soper, and Savage could have been making fakes. The problem is, Talmage didn't do more digging to find out just how far back these Michigan relics were being found. And again, the cuneiform Yod-He-Va symbol has been passed down through the generations among Algonquin Native Americans from their ancient ancestors. And it is the name of Creator, and they pronounce it Yod-He-Va, even to this day. Another interesting find in Michigan is this carving of a Hebrew menorah in a cave that belongs to the Potawatomi tribe. And the Potawatomi say that this is a sacred symbol from their ancient ancestors. U.S. academia says it's a pitchfork. But as you probably know, U.S. academia doesn't care about learning from the Native Americans. Here are some Hebrew carvings found in Connecticut of the names of some biblical prophets. But U.S. academia says that some guy who just happened to know Hebrew was taking a lunch break from working in the mines and decided to just carve these names into the rock. Here's another artifact called the Bat Creek Stone, found on Cherokee land near Bat Creek in Tennessee in 1889 during an official U.S. archaeological excavation controlled by the Smithsonian itself. They said it was ancient Cherokee writing and would display it or print it as such. And nobody ever accused the stone of being fake until about 75 years later in the 1960s, when Cyrus Gordon, a professor of Mediterranean studies at Brandeis University, said that the stone had been shown upside down for all those years, and that when turned right side up, the characters engraved on the stone were ancient Hebrew letters that said, "For the Judeans." Some other translations vary slightly, but Judeans or Judah is always in there. Well, as soon as people started noticing that, then suddenly U.S. academia started saying, oh, well then the stone is fake, even though they found it on their own controlled excavation, and the Smithsonian continued to display it and print it upside down. Well, in recent years, the Cherokee won a U.S. court case to get all of the artifacts and skeleton bones found on that dig back from the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian said they couldn't find the bones, but the Cherokee did get the Bat Creek Stone, but there was a condition attached with it. The Cherokee were told by the court that they had to continue to display the stone as it was in the Smithsonian, upside down. So you think about that. There is a great effort by U.S. academia to prevent people from knowing that there is Middle Eastern ancestry within some ancient Native American tribes. And again, sadly, Brigham Young University sides with U.S. academia, and many people think that BYU represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But they don't. You can find some good stuff on there, but just remember, BYU is not the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So do your own research. Don't blindly believe what college professors and their books tell you, even BYU professors. Learn about the artifacts, but regardless of the artifacts, learn about the Middle Eastern language and customs still preserved in some Native American tribes today. Now here's a survey drawing of a unique ancient Hopewell mound builder site in Ohio that I talked about in part 2. And I've also made a separate video about it called Hebrews Were in Ancient America, which I'll leave a link to in the description box below, and you can learn about it in more detail. Notice the Hebrew oil lamp, the 9-candle menorah, and also the compass and the square, all of which have sacred meaning in the Hebrew culture. A survey drawing of this site is included in the Smithsonian's first publication in 1848 called Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis. Yet there are still people who accuse this site of being fake as well. Later, in the early 1900s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completely leveled this entire site down to the ground. Yet they left all the other mound builder sites around it alone. So again, you think about that. The site has been said to have been at or near this spot here by Fayetteville, Ohio. And if you notice this field here on the left, there are ditches that form a sacred Hebrew letter called the Shin, which may have been where the mound builders got the dirt from to build the site, or it could just be a natural formation because there's a lot of similar curvy ditches in the area. But if so, maybe that's why they built it in that area, which isn't a far-fetched idea, because the city of Jerusalem in Israel is built on terrain that naturally forms a shin as well. Here are some other important artifacts that were found in the 1860s in Ohio near a town called Newark, which are also accused of being fake. I've made a more detailed video on these artifacts as well, called The 10 Commandments in Ancient America, which I'll leave a link to in the description box also. Anyway, they were excavated at a mound builder site by a man named David Wyrick and 7 or 8 other witnesses, and are nicknamed the Newark Holy Stones. The most popular one is called the Decalogue Stone, which was inside the stone case you see behind it, buried with a skeleton at the bottom and center of a very large mound. This stone has the entire 10 Commandments engraved on it in ancient block Hebrew writing. The man in the middle is holding tablets and wearing a turban, and the name above his head says Moshe, which means Moses. The other stone is nicknamed the Keystone, just because that's what it looks like, and it has ancient Hebrew writing on all 4 sides, which says the King of the Earth, the Word of the Lord, the Laws of Jehovah, and the Holy of Holies. The small stone bowl is also significant because in the Hebrew culture, a vessel was considered impure if it had been made out of clay or something and then cooked to harden. And so if they wanted a pure vessel to hold holy water or oil, they would carve the vessel out of stone. And speaking of the 10 Commandments, Ohio is not the only place where they're found in ancient America. Remember the account earlier in this video from the book The 10 Tribes of Israel, about the Native Americans around Lake Superior in the 1800s who had part of the 5 books of Moses written on parchment in a little copper tube passed on from their ancient ancestors through many generations. And again, the mound builders were experts in copper. Well, the 10 Commandments are mentioned all throughout the 5 books of Moses, beginning in the 2nd book, Exodus, when the Lord gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. Also, the Cheyenne tribe know about the 10 Commandments from their ancient ancestors. And we're about to finally talk about the Cheyenne tribe. But one last thing, the 10 Commandments are also found carved in a boulder in the mountains of Los Lunas, New Mexico. This is another artifact that U.S. academia accuses of being fake. But if you speak with Native Americans in that area who know a lot about it, they'll tell you it was there long before any white explorers came to the area. The stone is still there today, but sadly, somebody vandalized it around 2006 and scratched over the top line. But the rest of it is still legible, and with permission, you can go see it. But that's not all. At the top of the mountain is an ancient fort similar to Fort Masada in Israel. There is also an astronomy carving up there which shows the position of the stars from one night during the year of, I can't remember if it was 107 BC or 107 AD. But how do they know this? Because today there is software which astronomers use that can mathematically calculate where the stars, planets, moons, comets, etc. were at any night in the past, even that far back in time. Some other things to research in the Southwest are the Tucson-led Arizona artifacts, which are really cool, but I need to learn more about them, and so I'm not going to go into them right now in this video. Alright, let's get into the Cheyenne tribe. I have a friend named Sean Littlebear who lives in Oklahoma and is one of the Cheyenne's medicine men, one of their 4 arrow men, and he's also their record keeper, but I'm not sure if they have more than one of those. Sean is also a 7th generation member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, meaning he had ancestors who joined the church back in its early days in the 1800s. The Cheyenne tribe also have Hebrew-related customs. Back in about the year 2000, the Prime Minister of Israel gave the Cheyenne tribe land to own in Israel, because Israel had learned that the Cheyenne were distant relatives of theirs. How did they know this? There's a Jewish ceremony that Israel knew had a missing portion of the ceremony, which their ancestors knew, but they no longer knew it. So they were searching among cultures that they believed had Hebrew ancestry to see if any of those cultures' ceremonies had this missing portion. Well, they found this missing portion in the Cheyenne tribe, because the Cheyenne performed this same particular Jewish ceremony, only they performed the complete version of it. So Israel had finally found this missing portion of the ceremony, and in return, the Prime Minister gave land in Israel to the Cheyenne tribe. Sean is one of the 4 arrow men in the Cheyenne tribe and has been invited by Israel to be in the ceremony when they perform it. That is not coincidence or fake. Now this land that the Cheyenne owns in Israel has a hill on it. It is one of 3 hills that are sacred to the Cheyenne people. Sean has told me about the other 2 hills. One of them is Bear Butte Mountain in South Dakota. The Cheyenne call it the Holy Sacred Walking Mountain. The reason for these names and why the mountain is sacred to them is because they say that a very long time ago, an army of their enemies were coming to attack their ancestors. And there was a great prophet among their ancestors who told them that if they had faith in the Creator, that the Creator would save them from the army. Then the prophet commanded the mountain to rise up, move over the army, and land on top of them. They say it looked like a giant walking bear. Sean says this is Mount Zerin spoken of in Ether chapter 12, verse 30 in the Book of Mormon, only it doesn't give all the details. It just says that the brother of Jared was able to move Mount Zerin by faith in God. The Cheyenne still gather at Bear Butte Mountain to this day. The other hill that is sacred to the Cheyenne people is the Hill Cumorah in Palmyra, New York. The hill spoken of in the Book of Mormon, where the last of the Jaredites and the Nephites were killed off at different periods in history, who also match up with the Adena and Hopewell mound builder cultures. And archaeology and Native Americans tell us that the Hopewell mound builder culture ended in New York around 400 AD. The reason this hill is sacred to the Cheyenne people is because they say that a record of their ancient ancestors was buried in it and would one day come out of the hill and bless the whole world. They compare it to seeds being planted in the hill and fruit growing from those seeds that would bless the whole world. And the Hill Cumorah is where the prophet Moroni buried the ancient metal record called the Book of Mormon in about 421 AD. And 1400 years later, in 1823 AD, Moroni appeared as an angel to a 17-year-old boy named Joseph Smith, who lived in Palmyra at the time. And Moroni finally let Joseph take the metal record out of the hill 4 years later in 1827, when Joseph was 21 years old. Over the next 3 years, with the help of God, Joseph translated the ancient record, which was a reformed Egyptian similar to what the Micmac tribe had, into the English language. And it was published in 1830, when Joseph was 24 years old, and is called the Book of Mormon. And since then, it has blessed millions of people all around the world by bringing them closer to Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and his plan of happiness. And the Book of Mormon tells of how ancient Native Americans knew who Jesus Christ was, and that he actually visited them and spent time with them after his resurrection. And there's an excellent book called He Walked the Americas by Taylor Hanson, a non-Mormon author who spent much of her life with Native Americans and learned that most of them had an account in their culture of a great white god or prophet who spent time with their people and performed miracles and taught them many things. So I suggest reading that book as well. These 3 sacred hills to the Cheyenne are not fake. This is the real deal. And earlier, I said that Sean Little Bear was a 7th-generation member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So back in the 1800s, in the early days of the church, many Cheyenne people were baptized and joined the church. They could hardly understand English at the time, so they could hardly understand the missionaries or read the Book of Mormon unless there was a translator to help. But the reason why they joined the church was because there was a Cheyenne prophecy that had been with their people since around 1200 AD. So that's long before the Europeans came to America. This prophecy described a young man whom they called All Sewn Up Man, because when they saw him in detail in the vision, he was a white man dressed in very fine woven material rather than the thicker woven material they were used to, and the only things that weren't covered by his clothes were his hands and his head from the chin up. The prophecy said that All Sewn Up Man would find a record of their ancestors in a hill. So in the 1800s, when 2 missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints told them about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, they'd already had that prophecy for 600 years, and they knew they needed to be baptized and join the church. And although they didn't move west to Utah with the rest of the church, there were Cheyenne people who would seek out members of the church to be baptized clear up until Sean's day. That's how Sean is a 7th-generation member of the church. I also mentioned that Sean is the record keeper for the Cheyenne people. The Cheyenne and many other tribes whom they associate with have many ancient records that they keep safely hidden and guarded in caves because they don't want the U.S. government to take them and destroy them as they've done with so many other Native American artifacts and cities. Mainstream U.S. academia would have us believe that Native Americans don't have any written history or language, which is absolutely false. Sean says the Cheyenne and many other tribes they associate with have records of their people, recorded on booklets, bark, leather, bones, and the most ancient records are preserved on stone tablets and metal plates, and are written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, Phoenician, and Hebrew. There are so many other Hebrew and early Christian beliefs preserved in the Cheyenne culture, such as the story of Adam and Eve, the 10 Commandments, as I mentioned earlier, and sacred temple symbols of creation, including the compass and the square. And the Cheyenne leadership was organized the exact way that Jesus Christ had organized his church while he was on the earth, both in Jerusalem, as mentioned in the Bible, and in ancient America, as mentioned in the Book of Mormon. And that organization is a chief apostle with 2 apostles under him and 12 apostles under them. The Cheyenne used to have a chief with 2 under him and 12 under them in leadership. This type of leadership ended when the U.S. government were trying to get the head Cheyenne chief to sign away their lands to the United States and give the chief an English name. The chief's real name was Ben Whiteshield, which is a Hebrew name, and he told them that he had Hebrew ancestry and didn't want an English name and didn't want to sign over the Cheyenne lands to the United States. Well, sadly, as we know, the United States ended up taking the Cheyenne's land anyway. And along that topic, I need to mention the U.S. Indian Removal Act of 1830, otherwise known as the Trail of Tears, where the United States wrongly justified taking away the lands of the Native American tribes and forcing them to move onto reservations on the other side of Arkansas, Missouri, and Iowa, which was then the western border of the United States. This is why so many Native American tribes are still in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska to this day. But the Cheyenne also know of the great city, Zion, or the New Jerusalem, which will one day be built in the United States when God gives this land back to the Native Americans, although it probably won't be called the United States at that time. Read carefully what Jesus Christ says to the Nephites and the Lamanites in 3 Nephi chapter 21, and particularly in verses 22 through 24. You'll see that it's their descendants, the Native Americans, who are the remnant of Jacob, whose other name is Israel. They will be the people in charge of building the New Jerusalem, and then the Gentiles, who are all of the other people on this land who choose to follow Jesus Christ and join the house of Israel, they will come and assist the Native Americans. And God told Joseph Smith that the center of Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be where Independence, Missouri is. Now look at where Independence, Missouri is. It's right by all those Native American reservations. The Trail of Tears was a horrible thing, but God has a way of causing horrible things to work out for the good of his people. And when it's time for the New Jerusalem to be built, the remnant of Jacob, the Native Americans, are right where the Creator needs them to be, so they can take charge of building the great city, the New Jerusalem. Now, are there any Native American tribes that we know of from the scriptures, the prophet Joseph, and church history who are descendants of Hebrews from the Book of Mormon? Yes, there are. And I plan on making a more detailed video about this, but for right now, I'll just tell you the tribes, and here are the sources for you to go read on your own. The specific tribes mentioned that I know of are the Seneca, the Wyandot, the Shawnee, the Delaware, the Sac, the Fox, and the Potawatomi. But in general, the prophet Joseph said from the 1830s clear up until the year he died in 1844 that the tribes at the western border of the United States were descendants of the people in the Book of Mormon. And the Lord himself said that was the border of the Lamanites, the line between Jew and Gentile, the Lamanites being of Jewish descent and the white settlers are the Gentiles. And remember, it was the Gentiles, the United States, who forced the Native Americans off their homelands in the east, along the Trail of Tears to that western border. Now, does that mean that every single tribe in the area of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska have Hebrew ancestors? I don't know. But as I've talked about earlier in this video, the Potawatomi do have Hebrew ancestry, and so do the Seneca, the Wyandot, the Shawnee, the Delaware, the Sac, and the Fox. I've also talked in this video about the Cherokee, Muskogee, and Cheyenne, and they all do as well. And all of these tribes, as well as many others, were forced to that western border by the United States. Now, I don't know about the Micmac. They may have been skipped since they were mainly in Canada, and I think the Nez Perce were already west of that border, and so I don't think they were affected until the U.S. started moving further west and forcing them off their lands. Sean Little Bear and the Cheyenne tribe associate with all of the tribes in that area, and he tells me that most of them have Hebrew ancestry. So there's my long video. I hope it was worth the wait, and I hope you enjoyed it. It took me a while to go through my notes and compile and condense this information. There's so much more good stuff to share that's not mentioned in this video, so much more good stuff to learn, and so many people who have helped me learn this stuff over the years. I recommend checking out what they have to share as well. Here are some of their names, but I'm sure I'm forgetting some of them, so I apologize. I just go to a lot of conferences where I talk with all these good people and listen to what they've learned as well. They have books, DVDs, and videos online, and can also recommend a whole lot of non-Mormon sources, both new and old, clear back to the colonial and early U.S. history days. But most importantly, if you talk with the Native Americans and listen to them, they can take you back even further than that. It's important to listen to what the Native Americans have to say because they can tell us so much more than U.S. academia can. And U.S. academia doesn't always tell the truth. And those among them who do are often ridiculed, discredited, and victims of character assassination. So like I always say, do your own research, and you'll find out that a lot of Native American tribes have Hebrew and Middle Eastern ancestry, regardless of whether you believe that Joseph Smith just learned and capitalized on that knowledge to create the Book of Mormon and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or you believe that he was a real prophet of God. I believe he was. And I believe that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, did visit ancient Native American tribes, as talked about not only in the Book of Mormon, but many Native American cultures.